Thank everyone for coming. I really appreciate it. I'll kind of talk about how this developed, and then we'll go from there. Definitely thank you to the staff here at Advanced Physical Therapy. For those of you who don't know, we are outpatient private practice based in orthopedics. Myself, I'm a physical therapist. Blake Barbera, who's behind the desk right here, he's another physical therapist. Blake started with us about 3 or 4 months ago, comes from a highly orthopedic background, originally from Thibodeau, spent some time in Florida, but has been a great addition to our company in general and specifically here in Morgan City. So other staff in the back who obviously they're the ones who do all the hard work, but I want to acknowledge them. Alexia, who's a personal trainer who serves as one of our techs and controls our wellness portion of our practice, which I'll talk about some of the things we do with functional mobility, which she's also certified and takes a big part in. Mindy's back there, Mindy and Paige. They're both 2 other techs that are involved in patient care on a daily basis with Blake and I, and both who do a great job. Yvette, who's kind of the front office receptionist, kind of do it all between her and Nicole, who have been with us, I think, a good while now. Probably I should know, but anyway, without them, none of this could happen. I'd like to thank Julie, who helped with catering and took care of all the food and all the little incidentals to make everything happen tonight. Scott, where's Scott? Scott Rishu, who kind of runs some of the Patterson, Dixie Youth and softball, who was kind of instrumental in getting some people here. And Brian Ferguson, who does a lot with the Berwick Bayou Vista area. So just all people that we contacted, and what we wanted to do is hopefully, if it goes well, which I think it will, is we want to try to start doing this either every couple months or once a quarter, where Blake and I just kind of do some public awareness based on something within the community. May or may not be from an athletic standpoint, may just be from a community awareness. So, and then Tony Fura, who's walking in, also was helpful in kind of getting the word out for us. So anyway, why are we talking about the throwing athlete? Well, just from a personal story, probably about 3 or 4 years ago here in Morgan City, I had a high school athlete who came in and had Tommy John surgery. For those of you who don't know, it's basically a repair of a ligament in your elbow. And I was rehabbing him and got a call from actually 2 different parents who wanted my opinion if their son, who was basically still healthy, should have Tommy John surgery, because the kid who I was treating was back playing and throwing harder than he was prior to his injury. So it made me start to think, man, that's pretty bad if we have parents who are trying to subject their kids to voluntarily have ulnar collateral ligament surgery in order to hopefully get them a little bit stronger. So that combined with me being able to attend a symposium with, I think, 3 of the best orthopedic surgeons in the country. Dr. James Andrews, which you may or may not heard from about him. He's a famous orthopedically renowned surgeon. Dr. Ben Kibler, who is in Kentucky, who is a great guru on tennis players and overhead athletes. In New Orleans, Dr. Philippe Savoy, who also specializes in the shoulder and elbow. So we spent a week with them, or a weekend with them, both in lecture, and then we spent some time with the Tulane baseball team. And just opened my eyes to a lot as a therapist, probably which we can do better, educating parents, coaches, kids, athletes, and ultimately patients. But so we thought it was a good idea at the beginning of baseball just to kind of do something informative, make it interactive. So if you have questions, please feel free to ask. If you don't understand something, definitely stop and ask me. And what we'll try to do is kind of go through some basic statistics and then get into a little bit of anatomy, just so as coaches and parents we understand what people are talking about, and then talk about some specifics of strengthening and things that we should be teaching our kids at certain ages as far as mechanics and strengthening, and then looking at some risk factors of what we need to be aware of when we may not know our kids are hurting, but they actually are, okay? So, basically, the why is there's such an increase in injuries in the youth population of shoulder and elbows across the nation. We see it here in our practice. So things that we used to see in collegiate athletes, rotator cuff tears, elbow ligament injuries or ruptures that are requiring surgery, now we're seeing them in a population of 9 to 12-year-olds, 12 to 15-year-olds, that is becoming more and more increasingly a problem here in our practice and nationwide. So the goal simply is to promote long-term enjoyment regardless of the skill level, without pain or risk of injury, while we're teaching good fundamentals. Both as a parent, as a parent of 2 boys who played, who are 12 and 9, which I swore I'd never let my kids play travel baseball, and now they're both in their 2nd and 3rd years of playing, just because that's what dictates in order to be able to be competitive. So I figured it was important for me to educate, especially because I coach one of the teams, that I should be teaching and promoting good fundamentals in healthy recovery. Some interesting statistics. This is just general statistics on kids' sports. It says 90% of kids stated that they had some type of injury related to sport activity. This is not baseball, this includes youth, football, basketball, girls, soccer, whatever it is. 54% basically said they stated that they played injured. 42 said they didn't even let a coach know out of fear at a young age of not being able to play, or disappointing their dad or their coach or their parents in general. Sometimes it's the moms. Interesting thing is 27% of the youth coaches stated they had no clue that kids were injured on their team or were avoiding or hiding an injury because of that. So it's important to know that as coaches, the kids are probably not going to tell us they're hurting, but there's some visible signs, especially in baseball and softball, that we can be aware of that kind of gives us a hint as to what's going on inside with that kid. 40% of all these injuries are reported between the ages of 13 and 15 years old. There's a reason that's a vulnerable age. It's typically because that's when we hit a pretty good significant growth spurt with puberty, whether it's boys or girls. But then we have a lot of bony growth, but our soft tissue, our ligaments, our tendons, our muscles are not at a stage where it's capable of maintaining the stability that it had. So it puts us at a pretty vulnerable risk period. Specific to baseball, which I think is pretty amazing, is that there's a 5 to 7-fold increase in throwing arm injuries since 2000. I think there's one reason and one reason only, and that's travel baseball. Not so much travel baseball, but it's year-round baseball that now we're becoming more and more specific, which I'll talk to a little bit in detail in a little bit later. 30–50% of all youth arm injuries are due to overuse. We need to be aware and know the signs of what overuse is. At a 9-year-old, a 12-year-old, or whether he's a senior in high school, we need to be aware of that. Dr. Andrews at the Andrews Sports Medicine Institute did a study, basically said as youth pitcher throws with arm fatigue, there's a 36 to 1 times risk of injury. You see some statistics in different areas where it's even higher than that. So the risk is real. Our kids are being injured. We may not know they're being injured, but they're developing things at a very early age that going forward, when they become 12 and 15 and mature, if we don't have proper mechanics, we're really putting our kids at harm, not only for not to be able to play, but to have arthritis in an elbow or a shoulder when they're 25 and 30 years old, and then they're not functional to be in the workforce or just to be everyday life living in pain. So 70% of kids drop out by age 13 of all youth sports. So basically my thought is that's because of specialization. I think our kids are specializing a little too early. We're not teaching them to be athletes. We're teaching them to be a football player or a baseball player or a basketball player at way too young of an age. And there's research that shows if you're only playing one sport, you're not developing yourself as an athlete. You're not developing the motor skills, which eventually will help you at a later age to be able to be a little bit more specific in your sport as you mature. And then pressure from coaches and parents. We all want our kids to be the best, and we all want college scholarships, and everybody's going to play in the pros, but as we know, that doesn't happen. So we want our kids to be healthy. We want them to be able to enjoy playing as a youth, enjoy playing at a high school level, but also more importantly, that they're not walking around with arthritis when they're 25 and 30 years old, because we see it, and Blake can vouch for that, I'm sure. So risk factors, we'll run through these. A lot of the information is in the packet, but just to highlight a few. Year-round baseball, we should be taking off 4 months a year of throwing, regardless of what age, even at a high school age. The research dictates that. Seasonal event overuse, playing too much. This is a big one too, is playing in more than one league at a time. I know locally, as well as Thibodaux here, a lot of kids play both travel baseball, but they're also playing in league play, which is fine to do, but we need to be aware of that if our kids are pitching, if they're catching, and just be aware that certain pitch counts and all of that is affecting, from an overuse standpoint, and how we need to address that. We need to, as coaches, especially if we're coaching travel ball, is to be aware of that from a rec league standpoint and how that interacts between the two. Showcases, now kids are not even playing high school baseball, they're playing on these travel circuits, they go into these showcases, which now is a recruiting ground for colleges. So they put them on a radar gun, they see the velocity they can throw from right field to the plate, and these are things that I think from a progression standpoint exposes us to increased risk. And then just making pitches too early, different types of pitches, and having poor mechanics. Improper technique, which hopefully we can kind of discuss a little bit tonight, just as coaches to our parents, to educate your kids. Things like properly fitted equipment, training errors, pressure, failure of early injury recognition, and sports specialization again. And then at certain ages, we have just inherent musculoskeletal imbalances, whether it's through posture or whether it's when we start lifting weights from a high school perspective, how that leads to certain injuries in the upper body as far as from a throwing athlete. All these problems are magnified because the younger the athlete, definitely the more vulnerable they are to injury. So with that being said, those risk factors are there, it's age dependent, we want to be aware of them and be able to assess as coaches and parents if something's wrong with our kids. So, talking a little bit about anatomy, we'll look at anatomy, we'll talk about some of the mechanics at different ages, and look at how we screen our kids, what's the best way and easiest way to effectively do it, but then also, how do we functionally strengthen our kids, knowing we have limited time and the ability to probably have limited attention span with some of our age groups. So there's some things you can do that you can incorporate into practices, or if your coaches or kids are not doing it at practice, you can easily do it at home as a concerned parent. So let's talk about what muscles are basically involved when we're talking about throwing. Well, when you're talking about throwing, 50% of the velocity of throwing comes from basically our core and lower extremities. So everybody talks about core. As therapists, we come in, we talk about core. We got to get your core strong. Your back's hurting, your neck's hurting because maybe your core is weak. So, you can buy any kind of workout program and it talks about strengthening your core. So to easily define the core, basically you're talking about your abdominals, and it's not just the abdominals, the rectus abdominis that we see, which is the six-pack muscles. We actually have 3 different layers of muscles in our anterior part of our stomach area that are responsible for stabilizing the spine, but also generating force and power, okay? On the back side, the same thing. There's 3 layers of muscles that are responsible for stabilizing the spine and also moving the spine so that we generate power. But not only is our abdominals and our low back muscles included in the core, our hips, which to me I think is equally, if not more vital from the standpoint of a baseball, throwing, running, hitting. I think our hips are always, a lot of times, are the missing link, and I'll show you how we can easily assess the hips to determine if a kid is weak and what we can do in order to address that and assess it from a baseball standpoint. So hip musculature is very important. One muscle in particular, which we'll talk about, is the glute medius muscle, which is basically the muscle which allows us to single leg stance, which anybody that plays baseball knows that single leg stance is a huge part of throwing, especially for pitching. So if we have some weakness there, we can't expect our kids, even at an adult level, to be able to throw a baseball consistently, accurately, with good velocity, without creating injuries if we have weaknesses. Now, the glute medius is one of those muscles that is not going to be pretty to work out. You're not going to see it. It's not going to be your biceps or your pecs. So kids are not going to want to work these muscle groups, but they're vital to the long-term, in my opinion, the long-term health and safety of even relating it to the shoulder of how we keep our kids healthy. The pelvic floor. The pelvic floor is kind of the muscles that are underneath of our pelvis. These are muscles that are hard to try to isolate and eliminate, but it's also part of the pelvic floor. This is sometimes can be especially important in females, especially as they mature. So if they complain of a lot of back pain or weakness that just doesn't seem like it's getting better, it's another area, just as a therapist or as not necessarily as a coach, but more in a medical model, that we want to be aware of and know that it's an important part of the core musculature. So our stabilizers, these are more muscles that are higher up, I would say from mid-back all the way kind of up into the neck. These stabilizers are important because they're going to basically function a couple different ways when we're throwing. But some of the main muscles, which I'm sure everybody hears, is the rotator cuff. The rotator cuff is actually a group of 4 muscles, all kind of serving a different function, but the main thing is to provide stability to the shoulder in order so that the bigger, more prime movers can actually do the work that they're required to do. It's a very common area that we find a lot of weakness in. I could pretty much guarantee that if you take a high school kid, even at that level, that's working out at school 3 to 5 days a week, we can isolate the rotator cuff along with the next group of muscles, which is the middle and lower trap, which are basically muscles which basically stabilize the spine at the level of scapulas or shoulder blades, that if we come in and test those muscles, they're going to have some deficiencies there. So you can see when we kind of go through the mechanics of the throwing, how those muscles play a part and how important they are to strengthen them, and how as we develop, they become equally important because we've become so anterior dominant in what we do from a high school level and just from a postural level. So these group of muscles, the rhomboids, the lats, the serratus anterior, muscles that probably if you're not in the medical field or you enjoy working out on a daily basis, are muscle groups that you never hear of. You're not going to ever physically see them on someone's body, but they're also going to be some of the most important if we want our athletes to stay healthy. And for the couple of you who have spent time with us here, from a patient standpoint, you can pretty much guarantee you were hammered on that while you were here. So I'm sure Blake can vouch for those areas too. So anyway, so that's a little bit of anatomy assessment. Now, strength is important, there's no doubt. Our strength in our core, the strength in our posterior scapular muscles, very important. We can be as strong as an ox, but if we don't have proper mobility, then the strength is useless. So there's a lot of people who believe that until you correct mobility deficits, or if we have limitations in the way our spine moves, or if we have tightness in our hips, if we have tightness in our ankles, that our strength is basically becomes insignificant, because without enough proper motion in these joints, we can't effectively be able to get into the positions that we need to be able to get into in order to properly throw and properly hit, whether it's hitting baseball, whether it's throwing a football, whether it's killing with a volleyball, or throwing a javelin, as David is the track coach here at Central Catholic. So it's an important link The lower extremities basically drive what happens in the shoulder. So we can't forget that just by trying to strengthen or work on somebody's arm, if we're not looking at the core and lower extremities, we're missing about 50 to 75% of the boat. So, anybody has any questions on any kind of particulars of anatomy or the importance of it? Okay. So, how do we assess? So, this was really neat, I found at the symposium. This is things that even at a collegiate level, the trainers at Tulane do with their baseball kids, basically almost like on a quarterly basis, even as they're training in the off season, and even they kind of go back to it during in season. They did 3 simple techniques which can translate into any age group from a baseball standpoint, really from a functional standpoint. So they recommend that we essentially assess the kids 3 different ways, from age 9 to age 18, if they're involved in any sort of baseball or any type of overhead athletic sport. So the first one is basically a single leg stance. So, and I cannot tell you how many kids, I have 2 kids right now, 2 kids that are playing baseball for Berwick, who are probably 2 of the better kids on the team. Both of them came in unrelated hip injuries or anything related to the hip back. So first thing we did is we had them to do basically a single leg stance. So basically have them stand up and try to hold. And they should be able to hold with very little sway, both legs, for at least 10 seconds. So they should be able to get up here. We shouldn't have to see this or basically lose their balance. So these are 2 high school pitchers who we put them in a single leg stance and they couldn't maintain it for more than about 5 seconds. So quick test. We did this as Lance, Lance's son is on our little 10-year-old baseball team. We did this with our baseball team about the 2nd week in practice, and I'm telling you, there wasn't a kid on the team who could hold it. And this is a 10-year-old team that could hold it for greater than 5 to 8 seconds. So we testing these kids, and then we're trying to, in a way, teach them how to throw properly, but we really can't expect them to throw properly if we're not doing the prep work. So it's an easy, it's a quick test. Any coach can do it, any parent can do it, but it's a great indicator of if we're ready to be able to throw functionally without increasing the risk of our kids. The second one is a single leg squat and hold. So basically they may be able to come and hold 8 to 10 seconds, but then can they go down into a squat and hold that? So there's some differences as far as the literature. Some people say that should be able to get about a 70-degree bend, some say almost a 90-degree bend, and to be able to hold that. So I think even as a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old, upward to 12 to 15, 18-year-old, this is something that we also should be testing. So that's a function of 2 things. It's a function of that gluteus medius or just core strength, but it's also a good test to check for mobility problems. So what we know is that if they can't get into that squat and hold it, there's either limitations in their hip, maybe it's a tight hamstring, maybe it's a tight gastroc muscle or calf muscle, maybe their ankle is limited. But you know, if you got a kid who can do it but maybe not be able to get to that 70-degree mark, then do you really need to get them assessed? Is it really going to make a big difference? Probably not if everything else is good and consistent. But the kids who can't even, you know, maybe unlock their knee and just fall over, those are the kids where, you know, you as a parent or as a coach really need to be aware that even at a very young age, they're probably, number 1, are not going to be able to throw with good mechanics. Number 2, if we want to throw these kids, especially pitching or a catcher or an infielder who's going to throw, you know, more than just 1 or 2 times a game, they're going to get fatigued very, very quickly, and then I think we're exposing them to injury very, very rapidly in that way. The 3rd test is basically a plank. So everybody kind of understands what a plank is. There's basically 2 ways to do a plank. You can basically, it's a push-up position. The other way to do it is kind of just getting them on their elbows if they aren't able to maintain or put weight through their hands effectively and hold it. So When we do a plank, we want to teach kids or adults to kind of put their feet together, tighten their butt muscles, kind of pull in their abdominals. As a kid level, we just want to see if they can get into the position. Can they get into a position to maintain doing a push-up? Doesn't have to be for a minute, but they should be able to at least to get into it and hold it for about 10 to 15 seconds. Basically, the guidelines from a health and wellness standpoint basically states that an adult, and I would include 15-year-olds to 18-year-olds in that age group, they should be able to maintain that for 45 seconds to a minute. Now, one of the things that we do, which we'll kind of talk about what we do from a therapy standpoint and how we screen our kids here is, and Alexia probably can vouch for that too, is that we get kids that, they may be 190 pounds full of muscle, but can't maintain any trunk stability in the position of a plank. This is not only a good test for lower extremity core, like we talked about, our abdominals, our glute muscles, our low back, but it's also a quick assessment that you could do for the muscles that we talked about higher up, the rhomboids, the serratus anterior, the trap muscles, because they basically, you can see how their scapula is weighing, or if they can maintain good stability. So those are 3 easy tests. I think as a coach, number one, you add value to the kids and to the parents. So especially even as a rec coach, a travel ball coach, especially as a travel ball coach, because I think as a coach, parents are paying good money now for you to be in the trust and care of you. So I think any value that you can add as a parent provides tremendous value to the kids and to the people who are entrusting the kids to your care to teach them. 3 easy tests, takes maybe 2 minutes to do on each kid. You can do it as a group, and you're going to be able to easily see which ones could benefit from some of the strengthening that we're going to talk about. So, obviously the consequences of not being able to perform, we can't expect our kids to throw with good mechanics. We can't expect our pitchers to be able to throw more than 15 or 20 pitches as a 10-year-old consistently and find a strike zone if those muscles are not able to be activated the way they need to be done when we are making our overhead activity. Greatly increases the risk of injury. I think that goes without saying. And I think we have to address prior to progression with volume or distance. So, we can't expect our kids, a 10-year-old, to be able to throw from third base or from center field to third base or center field or home without some kind of funky posture and positioning, without it, if we don't have the proper stability. So, quick, easy way to assess it. It makes a lot of sense. It's easy. And like I said, I think you're providing great value to the kids in that way. So, let's talk about teaching throwing. First off, I'm not a high school or collegiate coach. I've been involved with overhead athletics all my life, played baseball, played football. So, you think you know a little bit, but I can tell you as you start trying to teach it to 9 and 10-year-olds or 11 and 12-year-olds, basically it can become a very humbling experience very quickly, because you can't translate what needs to be done in order for them to throw correctly. So this is not only my thought process, it's kind of basically a lot of the reading that I do with some of the people that I trust as far as in the PT field, in the medical field, and just in the health and wellness field, is that 9 to 12-year-olds or anybody under 12-year-old, if you're teaching a 6 or 7 or 8-year-old how to throw, we need to keep it simple and stupid. So we can't go into instructing kids at this age, okay, well, I need to release here, I need to throw over the top, I need to throw 3/4, I'm gonna come side on, I want this kind of wind up, I need to crow hop, I need to take a shuffle step before I throw. I just think the more we give them at that age, the more we confuse them. And I think there's some simple keys that we can give this age group that we can actually break down with drills and make it fairly easy, so that the kids, number one, see the success. And once the kids see the success, then I think you get buy-in from them. And when you get that buy-in, I think, you become cool coach. So, you know, as a parent, these are things that we can easily do with our kids. We can do small little drills instead of just going out and just chunking it and seeing, you know, where it goes and how it goes. So, one thing that we try to do with our team, and I think is good for any age group or any group younger than 12, is one of the cues you want to give them is glove position. So glove position, basically, you always start with the ball in the glove. Whether you're fielding ground balls, you're going to come to here, whether you're on the mound. Mostly at that age group, we teach in pitching from the stretch. So basically, this is the starting position. It's easy. It's something symmetrical for the kids. And from a motor standpoint at that age, our kids understand symmetry. They don't want complex patterns brain-wise. So we want to make things that are symmetrical on right to left side, make things that seem that it fits the brain so it's easy for them to go through. So we always teach glove position starting here. The next thing we teach is just a nice symmetrical opening of the arms. I like to use, we're kind of loading the gun, and this is the gun barrel, so we got our aim here. So what we teach is basically a nice little opening. I always try to stress, try to show the ball as a pitcher, show the ball to the outfield. That way our hands are on top of the ball. Depending on how big the size of the hand is, you may be able to teach a two-hand grip, two-finger grip, three-finger grip. They may need to still grab it here. Girls, same thing, obviously, with a softball. But it teaches them how to get the hand on top of the ball, but it also helps align the shoulder and the elbow. It teaches them at an early age a nice little cue of where they need to be. So what you'll see a lot of times is, you know, they fling here. A lot of kids will kind of shot put at that age, but just getting me in that position where the ball's on top is going to make everything else from a release standpoint a lot easier. One thing that's just easy to do with that is as you're teaching them to throw, one easy kind of, to me, a real quick positive feedback is we should have reverse spin. So we should be able to take the ball from on top, they should be able to release, and they should be able to see that they have some reverse spin on the ball. So that's immediate feedback as a coach, as a parent, and it's for a 9 and 10-year-old, 11 and 12-year-old kid. They know, well, I might not have the perfect mechanics, but they know they had the proper release. So that as their body develops, they're creating that motor pattern now. So as they do get stronger and really focusing on velocity, that they'll at least have the proper mechanics from a fundamental standpoint. So other little simple things that we teach is easy is to close the front shoulder along with closing the front foot, because that basically allows for an easy transition from stance leg over the top. So, you know, it's easy to teach a kid to get into a nice little stance phase and work on opening, where your foot is already where it needs to be, the shoulder's where it needs to be, arm position, and then follow through. It makes things very symmetrical for the kid. It gives them immediate feedback, and it's easy as a coach to teach. That way we're not teaching, you know, where does the ball need to be released? You need to be at this point from when you're hit the acceleration phase, or however that technical stuff at that age just goes over a kid's head. But this is something that's easy to do. So some other keys that we kind of focus on or try to instill is that as you push off, you follow through, you're trying to keep your head still. The back shoulder, whether you're right-handers, your back shoulder basically replaces your front shoulder. And what that's going to teach is a good weight transfer, an easy follow-through, and then basically it makes it as just a nice flowing motion instead of breaking it down into points. So it seems like a lot, but actually from a teaching standpoint, you're teaching an opening, you're teaching a toss with basically one shoulder replacing the other while keeping your head still. So as a coach or as a parent throwing with your kid, once you know these things, it's easy to be able to correctly correct your child and then be able to do some easy drills, which I think are simple to do, that can help instruct with how to improve their throwing mechanics. So some simple drills. I think this is good for anybody. First one is basically doing a static standing with the weight shift toss drill. This is a simple drill where you get into the stance You're teaching a kid to be able to rock back, so they load and then basically throw it, and then have them carry through. So it's a great position to be able to get into to teach them weight shifting. You're going to notice kids that are 9 and 10 have no clue how to get to the back foot, which basically tells you they're not probably driving off their foot when they're throwing. And so they're probably losing velocity. Not that that matters at this age, but more importantly, it's probably a tremendous hindrance on accuracy. So that's an easy drill. These are drills that, as our little team will do immediately before we even put a ball in their hands, just to be able to get that weight shifting. A lot of times you can determine which kids have pretty good rhythm and they get it. The other ones are just going to be kind of what you don't want to label them, you know, motor morons, but you're going to have kids that just can't figure it out. And so those are the kids where you have to realize and then maybe work with those a little bit more to try to bring them up to speed. And that, again, now I kind of go back to value, but for a kid who's playing rec ball, who may not be your top kid, I mean, if you want to provide benefit to a kid, to make a parent appreciative, I mean, you teach them little things like that where the light goes off on the kid, and it's going to end up making a world of difference for them. But more importantly, you make them feel pretty good about themselves. We do some symmetrical shoulder opening with the lateral hop, just kind of teaching them opening, basically where they hop in and open, essentially teaching a shuffle step or an early crow hop. But the reason we do that, and I think it's an easy drill, number one, it's kind of fun for the kids, but also it teaches them how to open and the importance of symmetry from the right side to the left side, and how this lead arm is important to be able to get their momentum going forward in order to make a proper throw. Easy drill, you could do it a minute, 2 minutes, simple to do. I think an oldie but goodie is the half kneel throwing. I think anybody who's teaching a kid how to throw, if you don't put them in half kneeling, I think it's just kind of poor coaching in my opinion. From a half kneeling standpoint, it's a great way to teach them the transition from lower extremity to upper extremity. You can see how they basically disassociate their hips from their trunk. It's a great way for them to see, oh boy, if I use my abdominals a little bit, they don't know they're using their abdominals, but I can figure this out. And this is pretty cool because I can get the ball where it needs to be with a lot more accuracy. This is great for kids who shot put or push, where they're using no lower extremity. They're so scared they're going to throw it inaccurately that they just kind of shot putting it across the field. So a great drill. Again, it's great before you go into a long toss situation, warming up before practice. Single leg stance, hold with the toss. This is great, I think, for pitchers. They see it doing a variation of ways. One way is you have your kids kind of tap, kind of come up to that standing position maybe 3 or 4 times to work on one-legged balance, and then you have them throw. You can have them sit. We kind of have our kids just sit here, and I'll hold them there for 8 or 10 seconds, and then we throw it. You don't even need a ball. A lot of times we'll hold them up and then make them stand, and then we'll check the position of their hands as far as is the ball where it needs to be, is our transition here, or we're pushing off our back leg, is our front foot kind of face forward but not open. So these are 4 easy, simple drills, I think, for that age, make things fun, that you don't need to spend a ton of time on it because they don't have the attention span in order to be able to do it anyway. So 12 and up. Here, I think, is when you can become a little bit more technical, talking about the different phases of throwing. I still think it's sometimes a lot for the 12-year-old age group, but I do think they can become to develop kind of motor patterns in order to be able to begin to feel what it feels like to release the ball at certain positions, because their body's maturing. They're probably understanding the mechanics a little bit better if we've done a good enough job starting with them from a 9-year-old standpoint. So I'm not going to go through the 5 stages because I think that's something that we can do on our own. I will kind of go through and talk about the muscular component of it because it leads into where the primary reason, the primary injuries that occur at what stage. So the first step obviously is the windup. Pretty neat to know that basically a basic windup and pitch takes about 2 seconds. and about a second and a half of that time is the wind up. So from stage 2 to 5, it's a pretty quick explosive movement. So from a training standpoint, we need to train explosively, especially when they get at this age and a little bit older. So a lot of plyometric work, a lot of jumping, those things that kind of promote a very explosive movement. So the second phase is what's called the cocking phase. There's an early and late phase, and this is basically where we're getting into our throw before we begin to accelerate to the release point. The important thing about this phase is where the demand and what type of demand, the muscular demand. So we talked a lot about the back of the shoulder and their role as far as a stabilizer. So in the cocking phase, the muscles that we talked about, whether it's the trap muscles, the lat muscles, the back of the deltoid muscles, the rotator cuff, they're in a loading phase. So they're in a concentric loading phase. There's two different types of strengthening. So if I'm doing a bicep curl and I have some weight and I'm curling it up, I'm shortening the muscle. That's a concentric type of contraction. So the other type of contraction, which is an eccentric type of contraction. So basically, for those of you who are in the gym, if you do negatives, a negative is considered an eccentric type of contraction. As an example, if I've got a weight in my hand and I'm doing a bicep, but I'm slowly lowering and keeping that tension on there, my muscle is lengthening, and that's considered a lengthening contraction or an eccentric contraction. So in baseball, we have muscle groups, particularly the muscles on the backside, that are going to load in a concentric fashion and in an eccentric fashion. So the importance of that is that we got to train them that way. And so if we get a kid in the gym and he's only doing concentric lifts where he's strengthening from an hypertrophy standpoint, but we're not working on that lengthening type of contraction, we exposing our kids to injury pretty quickly, especially as they get a little bit older and more mature. So in that phase, basically, the heavy demand is on the back of the shoulders in a concentric fashion. So we're loading for power. The acceleration phase is basically from the end of the cocking phase to where the ball is released. So pretty cool, I think, to think that some of the speed can be in excess of 7,000 plus degrees per second. So there's a heavy demand in the front. That's where our pecs and the front of our deltoids kind of kick in to be able to get us moving forward. It's a violent move, which means there's a lot going on at the humerus, with the head of the humerus, which is basically the upper arm bone. So this is a violent, pretty important movement, but it's a concentric movement. The next phase is our deceleration phase. This is where we create injury. Okay, so deceleration is from when the ball is released as we start slowing down the arm. So that is important because those muscles that just loaded on the backside now have to go to help slow down that motion, and that's where your eccentric demand comes in. At this age group, probably 90 to 95% of the kids, boys or girls, that we see, they're going to come in because they're going to have some restrictions in their shoulder, but they're also going to be super weak from an eccentric standpoint. So we're letting our kids go out and throw and throw and throw, but yet we have no control on how to stop as we are throwing. So these are your overuse injuries. These are where you see your rotator cuff ruptures. You're going to see your bad impingements, your bad tendinitises, because those muscles are just fighting so hard to stabilize and slow down the humerus that they can't do it. So there's going to be fatigue, and then there's going to be trauma. Okay? And if it's not the shoulder, it's going to be the elbow at that point. And then obviously the follow through is the completion of movement. Here's where our core comes in, because we need to be able to finish with balance. So if our core is weak, if we don't have good stability, those are the kids that you're going to see that are falling off the mound, that are going to field a ground ball and have no idea how to finish. They're going to fall over, or just the ball is going to go sailing because they have no ability to control or slow down their body in order to be able to finish the throw. So that's basically the 5 steps. That's the muscular demand that's required. So why does that make sense? Because we need to know how to strengthen our kids. Not from a rehabilitation standpoint, but we need to know how to effectively strengthen our kids so that we don't get them in a situation where they need to see us. right? So, how do we strengthen? Well, let's talk about some considerations based on age. So our 9 to 12-year-old group, we have to consider the level of fitness. So even as a travel coach, we may have a kid who, may not be in the best shape, may be a little bit heavy, or whatever that may be. Maybe a kid who's just not that athletic. And he's going to be matched up with, Johnny, who is the best in everything he does and is going to catch on to everything very, very quickly. So we need to accommodate for the not so advanced kid. And we can't let him be doing things at the level of our better kids right off the bat. We need to try to get him to where he is. So we need to be aware of that. Other thing is growth plates are open. So this is where we see shifts in the growth plate, where they start with this kind of just this diffuse pain when they throw. They end up going to the doctor. They x-ray them, and their growth plate's inflamed, it's shifted, and then they're done. So, it goes from a little bit of pain to baseball season's over. So a minimum of 6 to 8 weeks where they won't even let you pick up a baseball. You'll be able to run and maybe hit a little bit, but you won't be throwing a baseball. So we have to be aware of that. Growth plates is a big deal at this age. Again, not that I think a lot of parents or coaches are doing this, but avoid gym workouts. Even if it's home gyms, we don't need to have kids bench pressing at this age. We don't need to be loading them with a squat. We don't need to be teaching them power cleans and that type of movement. You think that's kind of crazy at this age, but if you think about it, there's a lot of 12-year-olds that are in junior high. And whether you're 6th, 7th, or 8th, depending on what school you're in, they may be exposed to some of that. So, we have some 12-year-olds. I have a fixing to be 12-year-old, but he's in 5th grade, but he's playing with kids that are in 7th grade who happen to be 12. And they're probably at a junior high, which are kind of probably getting exposed to that. So we need to be aware. We need to educate our coaches at the schools that we're at, or let them know that maybe, even though he's 12 and in 7th grade, he may not be ready yet to be able to load a barbell and start doing bench press or a loaded squat, especially if they don't have the mobility to do it. These kids easily fatigue. Their attention span is not what we want them to be, and a lot of times they're not at the level that, from an endurance or conditioning standpoint, where they can tolerate a lot of strengthening. So, what's recommended at this age? Well, it's important with anything we do to emphasize form and proper dosing. What I mean by dosing is how much do we give them. So this is not an age group where you want to strength train them for 30 to 45 minutes. This is an age group where you want to maybe spend about 10 or 15 minutes giving them some dynamic stuff, basically beginning to show them form and how we do some strengthening, and then go on to something else. That 5 or 10 or 15 minutes that you're spending with them is going to help do develop what's called neuromuscular control. Basically, you're starting to, in their brain, develop the pathways to teach them, oh, this is the proper way to do a push-up. Oh, this is a proper way to do a sit-up or whatever, even a jumping jack. We have kids who can't even do proper jumping jacks at this age. So you're creating motor pathways at this time, which may not seem like a lot, but you're setting these kids up to succeed as they get to an older age. So, big believer of multi-sports. I'm going to get on my little rant just for a couple minutes. I have two collegiate coaches that we have access to. One is Coach Thibodeau at Nichols, and then personally, Mike Bianco, who is the head baseball coach at Ole Miss, is a member of my family. He's married to my first cousin. Multiple times, multiple personal visits with both of these coaches collegiately are understanding that they don't want travel baseball kids that are only playing year-round. Now, so if you've got a kid who's athletic and they desire to play baseball at the next level, I can basically personally attest to the fact that through two pretty well-respected coaches, one in the Southland, one in the SEC, that I've been told by both of them that they'll recruit an athlete who they know is going to play basketball or football, that's been involved with playoff games as a point guard, or they're playing quarterback on the football team. They want those kids for a couple different reasons. Number one, they're going to learn how to compete. So by the time they get to the collegiate level, and I burn out on baseball, what they find is that when these kids get to college, they burn out. They played so much baseball, and that's all they played. They don't want to be coached, and they really are not motivated. They're there because they felt like this is what their end goal was. So it's basically a stopping point for them. Now there's exceptions to every rule, obviously, but from a general rule, that's their belief, and that's the way they recruit, which I think is pretty interesting. The other reason is basically from a biomechanical standpoint, kids who play different sports develop different muscle groups. So if we're only playing baseball, we're only developing one set of muscle groups. So I really think that is why we see more injuries now in all youth sports. I think that we see more football injuries now, and we get asked that question: why are people getting so much more injured now than when we were in high school and we played? I think there's a couple reasons. Number one, I think kids are bigger now, so that the collisions are bigger, the tension on their joints is more violent at an earlier age, which I don't know if we're physically capable and ready to handle that. The other thing is that we're not developing or trying to develop other types of motor patterns. We're not teaching our kids good agility work, or how to dribble a basketball, how to run up and down a basketball court. Do you need to be in AAU basketball? No. Do you need to be, playing football at a high school level? No, not. But your kids need to be doing other things, whether it's recreationally, shooting basketball in the driveway, whatever they do, playing volleyball, I don't care what it is, but the more they're exposed to, the more, from an athletic standpoint, they're going to develop, because they're going to develop different muscle groups, which is going to help them in their primary sport. Plus, as you see, you just don't need to be playing year-round baseball, especially, and that's the biggest thing. So I think that's basically my soapbox as far as specialization at an early age. So what do we do with these kids? Great things, fun things to do from a practice standpoint. Spend the first 15-20 minutes doing agility work, doing some strengthening. You have tons of resources. You can use us as a resource. You can use the internet as a resource. Things that we do is we bring ladders. We do the ladder drills. So we put the ladders out, we split them up into groups, and we do different types of footwork with the ladder drills. What you're going to find is they can't do it. And they think, oh, I got this, but they don't have the ability to do, specific little easy footwork, which is going to only make them better from running bases standpoint. When we're trying to teach stealing from first to second, if we're trying to teach them proper, getting from home plate to second base, hitting on the inside foot, the inside bag, those things that we want our kids to do, they may just not have the ability to process that in their brain at that age. So footwork drills, anything calisthenic wise, whether it's whatever it is, different types of calisthenics, tandem walking, or whatever you can come up with, whatever you did as a kid, or whatever you can Google, spending the time to do that in a structured way is, I think, very beneficial. Speed and endurance, I think this is a good age to start teaching kids proper warning form. So if you see a kid, you're doing base running, and he's got his arms flaring, and he's got his feet flaring, instead of just letting him do that, maybe that's the time where you spend 3 or 4 minutes on, hey, let's work on proper running form. And again, if you don't know it, it's easy to access it on the web and how to do it. It's easy to contact, somebody like us and say, hey, can you do an in-service for us for 10 minutes at your baseball practice? And those are the things that we like to do. But those are the ages where you want to begin to do that, because if they're not running right at 9 and 10, it gets harder to retrain that when they're 12 and 13. So great age to do that. Jumping, even in baseball. So it's just a good, think of your catchers who need to squat, come up, and throw. Man, that's a great explosive movement. If they can't get into a squat, or they don't know how to land from a jumping position, those are easy things that we can do that the kids have fun. It makes baseball practice, which in my opinion can be boring sometimes, it makes it a little bit more interactive for the kids. And then even instruction with proper changes of direction. So, set up a couple cones and cut around a cone, run figure eights, things that they would probably ordinarily do if they're playing football or bitty basketball or flag football, but may not be doing, especially if they're a rec kid and all they're doing is playing baseball, or if you're playing baseball year round. Strengthening at this age group, basically you strengthen the way you test them. Single leg stance, that's a great easy exercise to teach them how to be able to control it. Doing squats, whether it's a symmetrical squat, whether you have them start doing one-legged squats, putting them in a plank position and just teaching them, let them do it. Challenge the kids who can hold it the longest with the best form. Things like that. Working basically a little bit more on like hip mobility. There's some things, like putting a kid on his hands and knees and making him, whether it's extending a leg or kicking a leg up. Things that you can do and be creative with, in my opinion, should be done before you pick up a baseball in practice, because it preps the body so that when you do pick up a baseball, your body's ready to throw it. So, J-bands. J-bands are basically glorified TheraBands that have a hook on them and they have a strap. You give them one to each kid. I mean, it's great. We gave one to each of our kids. They know the first thing they do when they get to practice is they put it on the fence and they go to town. They do it, which is amazing because when they first did it, and these all have different resistances for different age groups, but you can put a kid on there for 2 weeks, he may not even be able to get it, not even do whether it's a rotator cuff or a scapular exercise, and then after about 3 weeks, boy, it starts clicking in, and so they begin to see that, hey, I'm getting stronger. So that functionally translates again into buy-in as a coach. And I think it makes it more enjoyable to them. And it's simple things, push-ups, sit-ups, squats, any type of calisthenics. Those are the type of things you want to do at this age group. 12 to 15, this is an age group where you get pretty awkward because you grow, posture becomes an issue, especially females. We tend to get a little anterior dominant, whether it's through puberty or just different muscle imbalances. So we need to be aware that these kids have muscle imbalances. They're going to be stronger on the front than they are in the back. So we need to spend more time strengthening the back in the correct way. Posture is huge. If we have bad posture when we sit and stand, you're going to have bad posture when you're throwing. And that's just going to lead to poor body mechanics and injuries. So what do? Again, we want to continue to emphasize form and mechanics, continue to strengthen the core. This is where, from a clinic standpoint, as we begin to integrate what's called an eccentric program. So this is where you can begin to strengthen the muscles that control the deceleration phase. So there's specific muscle groups. Dr. Ben Kibler, who we heard lecture, he has a series of exercises. This is what we want to do preseason. By the time they get into the season, it's probably a little bit almost too late because they're throwing now. And if they're weak, we're already exposing them to injury. So this is where off-season, in-season becomes to get a little bit more important because these kids are playing junior high. Some 14-year-olds are probably playing on the varsity level, right? So it becomes more important. So again, you want to use your J-band stabilization. By the way, this eccentric program, this is something that's a great way for us to strengthen the kids. They can come in almost as a wellness consult. They can come in with a diagnosis of weakness, and we can take these kids and get them ready for the season from a physical therapy standpoint. You want to start introducing the power lifts closer to age 15, but you want to make sure that you're doing them with minimal weight, emphasize and form, and you want to make sure that all that's done in the proper way. The older kids, obviously, the risk injury goes up because we start to hypertrophy. This becomes, in my opinion, what's called the football effect, or basically the appearance versus functional strength. This is the age the kids are in the gym. So high schools here are great, they're fantastic, but the problem is sometimes is we don't have strength coaches in our high schools. We have high school football coaches who want their high school football players to get bigger, stronger, and faster. So what that does is sometimes sacrifices the baseball and even the basketball kids, because we have those kids doing football lifts but not necessarily focus on the muscles that we need to be getting ready to be able to throw from an overhead standpoint. So, there's no fault of the coaches or the schools, we just don't have the ability to have strength coaches that tailor their workout programs to every sport. It's just, you know, if we lived in Texas and we could do that, that would be great, but in our area, we don't do it. So, football effect is important. We need to be aware that, again, these kids are gonna have big, strong pecs, big, strong deltoids, but we're gonna test out their rotator cuff, we're gonna test out the shoulders, the muscles between the shoulder blades, and they're gonna be able to barely hold that up against gravity. So these are your high school kids who end up missing time because they either injure their elbow, they develop some type of impingement or tendonitis in the shoulder that becomes chronic. So those are the important things to consider at that age group. You continue to strengthen them. At that point, you're at the mercy of the coaches pretty much because they're going to be in high school in their programs. You just need to be aware of what they're doing, and then, you know, be able to educate them, not necessarily maybe educate the coaches, but educate your kids to know that they need to do additional in order to get themselves ready to go. So, practices, and this is, it says ages 15 to 20, but this is really for the younger age group, is that make time to train. Work them out before the first 20-25 minutes of practice. The kids are going to love it. You're going to get them in tune, and it's going to be greatly beneficial. J-bands, warm up properly. The worst thing you could do with a 12-year-old up until an 18-year-old is start practice by picking up a baseball and telling the kid to warm up. So I think you're asking for trouble from that standpoint. We got to get our heart rate up. We got to get them running. Teach agility and strengthen and train at all ages at practice. I think that's important. There's different research on the dynamic stretching as compared to static. I'm a big believer in dynamic stretching, especially prior to throwing rather than basically your old static stretching. But there's different theories on that. I think that's way too much to get into. Pitch counts. This is, I printed a sheet from Stop Sport Injuries. I think it's a great resource. This is by Little League Baseball. This is the recommended pitch counts. I know some of the leagues here are going to a mandatory pitch count, I think was what we've heard. But I think more importantly than the pitch count is the rest after the pitching. And I think that becomes complicated from a pitcher-catcher standpoint. Your pitchers should never really catch on the same day they pitch. They should position play. Sometimes the catcher is at greater risk than the pitcher. There's more and more evidence that's showing that. So the pitch counters are important. I also put up here different age groups which you have, or when you should start introducing some different pitches. I think those are just informative. Also in there, it talks about the recommended rest based on how many pitches your kids throw. And if y'all have questions on that, I'll be more than welcome to try to help you through that. It makes it very difficult, especially because I know a lot of kids in this area, they play travel and they play rec. So my thought process is, especially if your kid's a pitcher or catcher, you have to kind of pick the one that's more important for the safety of your kid, and so that you don't risk injuring another kid. Is kind of pick which one is more important, and then focus your kids letting them pitch in that area. If you don't, that's fine. They may not ever be injured, but you are putting them at risk from, you know, an overuse standpoint, and from a fatigue standpoint also. So some of the signs and symptoms that I think we need to be aware of as parents or coaches that may show up that we may not think about, which may indicate something's wrong with the kid. Well, obviously, if the kid verbalizes it, he's pretty much just telling you he has pain. They usually don't lie because our kids want to be out there playing. Some simple things like avoiding putting weight on a certain body part. You know, baseball, like we talked about, is not a violent sport, but throwing can be violent. They may start developing hip, knee, or ankle trouble. Their back may be hurting them, and they just think, oh, I can play through that. That's important because now we know that all that affects the ability to throw. So even though we have a hip or an ankle injury, it may be affecting the way we throw. So we need to be aware if we see a kid limping or he complains of his back, we need to at least be aware that it's gonna affect how they throw, and we need to address that, whether it's through rest or getting the kid looked at. Appearing to be in pain, obviously, when using a particular body part. Sometimes kids that hurt, they don't sleep as well, they become irritable. So if you see a change in mood, there may be a reason other than just, them being in a poor mood, having a poor attitude that day. So be aware of that. Obviously, if there's stiffness, you may be sore after playing or pitching. That is normal. But if that soreness is there the next day, then I think it becomes an issue. So if you do pitch a kid a good bit, and you coming back on Sunday, and you plan to pitch that kid in a bracket game, you need to be aware, or at least know, hey, did you have some soreness this morning? Is there something that we need to know about? Little things like that, especially even in the travel baseball season that goes from March to July, that's still a long period of time where your kids are going to be doing a lot of throwing from a practice standpoint, which goes back to, do we actually count the pitches that if you throw in a true bullpen during the week? So from a practice standpoint, you don't want to have practice Thursday night or Friday if you plan on a Saturday and throw the kids that you're going to be pitching on Saturday. So if you're going to do a heavy pitch day with 9 and 10 and 12-year-olds, have your practices on Tuesday and Wednesday if you play on Saturday. That way you allow ample rest. And then again, if they're playing in the rec, just be aware that if they're throwing on a Thursday night and you going back and playing Saturday, there may be a reason where he's not as sharp on Saturday. Obviously, if they have some numbness, that could be an early indication of a nerve entrapment, especially in the hand. We see a lot of entrapment can be into the elbow or even into the shoulder. So if one of the kids say, oh, I just can't feel my fingers for some reason, even if it's for a couple of minutes, I think that's an important thing to be able to address pretty quickly. Typical, if sometimes the kids will come out and say, my arm's dead. Well, I think that's an indication that something's not right, especially if they haven't been throwing a lot. Maybe it's a cumulative effect. And this is, I see it, pretty often, especially with our kids, is, my arm's tired. It doesn't hurt, but it's tired. To me, that's a point where, the risk doesn't outweigh the reward of continuing to throw that kid. They can still take infield, just drop it in the bucket or roll it back. You can still have a very effective practice teaching the kid from a baseball standpoint. Blisters on the fingers, irritability, like I said, changes in mechanics. To me, that's during play. If you see a kid change his mechanics, to me that's a telltale sign that that kid's had enough on the mound. So whether it's a little bit of arm drop, he's not extending his, or whatever it may be. But if you know a kid's mechanics and you've coached him and you know what to expect from him and that changes, you can make a trip to the mound, but I guarantee you that there's probably something going on from a fatigue standpoint that's affecting that. And even things like changing hitting mechanics. If somebody has shoulder and elbow pain, they may end up changing their swing a little bit to compensate for it, even at a subconscious level. So, what's our role as parents and coaches? I think it's always a good idea to do a pre-participation physical annually, even at this age group. So this is something that, maybe your primary care physician can do. This is something that we can do. If you're gonna have a kid who's, is gonna be active, especially if you play in multiple leagues, why not get them assessed? I don't think it's a silly idea at 9 or even 10. I mean, we make our high school athletes go and do that. So, kids at this age are even more vulnerable. So, and if your physician, primary care, your pediatrician is not necessarily educated on the musculoskeletal aspect of it, I think as physical therapists, we are very capable of assessing whether or not a kid is ready, or there's some yellow flags or red flags which may indicate maybe he's not ready yet to throw. I think we always stress the importance of proper warm-up, even at home. Don't go out and just start throwing. Teach them early that they need to warm up properly, even if it's throwing 10 feet. Get on your knee and warm up that way. If we see them in the yard and we're trying to have structured time, it's important to do that. Also, by warming up, we gradually increase their heart rate, which makes them less susceptible to injury because we got our blood pumping. Simple things like teaching them how to dynamically stress, cool down. Our kids go, we play 3 games or 2 games on Saturday, and then they go eat a Big Mac and drink a bunch of Gatorade, which has a lot of sugar in it, soft drinks. This is a great time to bring in nutrition, about proper hydration. Just things like that at this age begins to instill what they're going to do when they get to 12 and 15 years old. Educate ourselves. The more we educate it as a parent, the better we can instruct our kids. Always consider their fitness level, especially from a rec standpoint, because these kids may not be going from 2 hours of video games to practice, and that's the only physical activity they get. So a rec coach, I think, again, being aware of that, even at a travel ball standpoint. Consider the level of fitness, and if you see an athlete that can't do what you're trying to teach him to do, that's a good time to get help. It's not an insult on the coach. It just may be this kid physically can't do what's required or what you're asking of him. And I think at that point, it's a good idea maybe to talk to the parent and say, hey, you ought to get somebody to look at it, just because his hips don't move very well, or he can't really extend his shoulder. And maybe that leads to improvement in his form and participation and enjoyment. 10% rule, don't increase activity greater than 10% weekly. So don't go from letting a kid pitch 10 or 15 pitches one week and then let him throw 50 the next. Gradually increase it from a strengthening and from a throwing standpoint. Simple things like proper equipment, check our equipment if we're coaches, just for safety reasons. Hydration and nutrition. If we're letting our kids hydrate at the day of the event, it's too late. This is not important in March, but it becomes very important in June and July if we're still playing at that point. Multiple sports to work on different muscle groups. Continually discourage a win-at-all-cost attitude. If we teach our kids that, they're going to hide injuries. They're not going to want to disappoint you and play through pain. Make them enjoy the process, not the results. And I think if we do that, they will have much greater enjoyment and they'll stay playing longer, because none of us are going to win every time we play. And preach fundamentals, fundamentals, fundamentals. I just want to talk a few minutes about my approach here. So about 3 years ago, I started following a guy by the name of Gray Cook. He's out in the Pacific Northwest. He developed basically what's called a functional mobility system, or screen, which we do here. Alexia is also certified to do it. So I want to talk a little bit about how we integrate a kid into our system. So a kid comes to us and we need an entry point, because especially now as physical therapists, we can see patients without a referral. So we see patients who come in who are requesting strengthening. We see patients who come in because they're hurting. So they come in at all different levels. So we need to know how to evaluate these kids so that we properly putting them back on the field or continue to have them on the field where they need to be. So what we do is we put them in an entry point. So when a kid comes see us, regardless, as if they haven't complained of pain, is first we want to know if they have any pain anywhere. If they don't, we do what's called a functional mobility screen. It's an 8-step or 7-step test that we do. It takes about 10 minutes, and we grade it. And we grade it 1 to 3 based on their ability to perform it. The neat thing about this technique is once you score it, you basically follow or able to find the weakest link in any athlete or any one of us. So what we know is our bodies move through the path of least resistance. So wherever the weakest link is where we need to address, because if we don't find that first, if we try to correct things by throwing darts at it, more than likely we may fix one thing and make something else worse. So we perform the FMS screen on them. As we go through the screen, if these kids have pain, which we may not know about, whether it's the back, the ankle, the knee, then it cues us in to say, okay, well, our kids are not really ready to get into a performance or a skill level model. So at that point, instead of training them for a sport-specific activity, we need to address the pain and what's causing it. So in combination with the FMS screen, we now have what's called the selective functional movement assessment. So it goes hand in hand. This is it's more of a physical therapy evaluation where we basically then we begin to break the body down into specific patterns and joints to be able to handle pain. When that pain or dysfunction is fixed, then we can kind of go back and put them into the skill level. So to me, it's been very educational. For one, it's kind of changed the way that we treat our athletes. Instead of just coming in and getting right to work as far as training and what we think is important from a health and wellness standpoint, it gives us a nice tool to be able to screen the kids, and then more importantly, it shows them where they lack from a motion and strength standpoint. So right off the bat, the kids buy in, they see functional improvement, and then once we are able to correct those things that I think make them susceptible to injury, then we can go to more of a high level training, sport specific, without putting our kids at rest. There's no age requirement for this. I mean, we've done kids as young as maybe 9 or 10, and we did Mr. Mike Lynn, who's in his 70s. So it's consistent across all generations, our age groups. It works well with how we function within a physical therapy world and then a health and wellness world. So this is kind of what we do. So if you do have a kid, whether it's your kid or a kid that's on your team that has difficulty, that just doesn't get it or has pain, this is where we can help, whether it's from a technique standpoint or from a medical model standpoint. And that's kind of how we function with it. So this just kind of talks a little bit about it. So as far as conclusion or prevention, I think the main thing is overuse injuries are preventable. And I think by just taking some simple steps, we're able to allow our athletes to play longer from a healthier standpoint, and I think that all translates into our kids enjoying sports a lot more. So you see the same things kind of repeat itself, warming up properly, rotating positions, don't let your kids pitch and catch at the same time. Make sure that we're concentrating on age-appropriate pitching. Pitch counts are important. Multiple teams, which I know is tough when we're in small communities. Don't throw with pain. If the kid's having pain, shut him down. Try not to pitch on consecutive days. I know that's tough when we do travel baseball. We do pitch our kids on consecutive days. We're just really selective in our pitch counts on Saturday if we want them to be able to throw the majority of their pitchers on Sunday. So there's ways you can get around that. Again, stress don't play year-round. Let our kids play everything. Always emphasize control, accuracy, and good mechanics. When a kid does develop, my opinion is that they should master the fastball first from a mobility standpoint, from a 5-step phase. Then you implement a little bit of a change-up before you ever consider anything to where you're going to start changing the torque on their elbows, their shoulders, and their wrists to be able to throw off-speed stuff. So, would you agree with that? So, and always speak with a professional. I mean, I think we're all trying to do kids good, and parents, we want our kids and parents as coaches to trust us. That's what we're here for. We can serve as a resource. So, anyway, that's it. I know it was a lot, but I think it was stuff that I think is easy to implement as coaches. Hopefully you've got some things that you can take back with you as a parent or as a coach, regardless of the age of your child, and that to know that you do have a resource here or wherever, that there are resources out there, that you have those kids that may not be the best, that we can address and maybe make those kids enjoy sports much, much more. Everything, a lot of the information that we went through obviously is in there. In there, I also put what's called a Throwers 10 program, which is basically a great concentric strengthening program that you can do in season. It's easily reproducible with TheraBand or light dumbbells. It's great to teach kids. It takes them about maybe 8 to 10 minutes. You can do it 2 times a week, 3 times a week. It's a great way to get basically all the stabilizers moving and getting their muscle memory going. There also is in there a throwing program. Any kid that gets injured should go into what's called a re-entry throwing program. That's basically the basic one which was given to you. There's an extended one for kids who are pitching at the high school or the collegiate level. So again, I really appreciate everyone coming. Thank the staff. I know it's hard to get here on a weeknight, especially on a Thursday night, but I hope y'all enjoyed it. I hope y'all enjoyed the food. And hopefully if we get good feedback, maybe in a couple of months we'll do another one. So if there's any questions, if not, thank y'all for coming.
Very good, very good.